Welcome to Detective's Diary. I am your host Wyatt. Drop a comment and tell us which city or corner of the world you're solving this from. Glad to have sharp minds like yours joining us tonight. Now, the case begins. If there's one thing that makes Nero Wolfe raise an eyebrow figuratively, of course, because he rarely bothers physically, it's an interruption before beer time. Beer time is 4:45 p.m. And any soul foolish enough to breach the threshold of the brownstone before then is either desperate, foolish, or both. So when the doorbell rang at precisely 3:42 p.m., on a drizzly Tuesday in April, I opened it with the face of a man who could have been happily napping instead. The man on the porch wore a pinstriped suit of the kind you see in courtroom dramas and high-end divorce settlements. He had sleek hair, a lawyer's jawline, and a briefcase that looked like it had never touched a public sidewalk. "Mr. Goodwin?" he asked, flashing a card before I could decide whether I liked him or not. "That's what it says on the mailbox." "Who's asking?" "Claude M. Torrance. I'm with the firm of Torrance and Greaves." He said it like I should have started applauding. I didn't. But I let him in. "Wait here," I said, motioning toward the front room. "No sudden moves." Wolfe gets jumpy when strangers breathe in his airspace. I left him with the orchids and might as well let them judge his character while I went to the office. Wolfe was in his chair, as always, bent over the Times crossword and sipping beer like it was communion wine. When I mentioned the name Claude Torrance, his lips pursed slightly. It was the Wolfe equivalent of a drumroll. "Show him in," he said. "Then leave." That last part, of course, was optional. I ignored it. Torrance walked into the room like a man entering a deposition. He didn't sit until Wolfe gave a nod. Then he crossed one leg and opened the pristine briefcase like he was revealing state secrets. "I represent an entity in, let's call it a delicate position," he said. "It involves a discrepancy in an internal financial ledger. A small matter of misaligned figures. My client is not interested in public exposure or police entanglement." Wolfe sighed audibly. "You are being deliberately vague, sir. For someone whose profession revolves around clarity, you indulge too much in smoke." Torrance cleared his throat. "The firm in question is Bartleby, Hume and Torrance. My own. One of the founding partners, Mr. Emery Hume, discovered an inconsistency in our quarterly partnership ledger. It was brought to his attention through an anonymous letter, typed, unsigned. The discrepancy involves a withdrawn sum of $87,000. Misattributed." I whistled, low. "That's not a rounding error. That's a vanishing act." Torrance ignored me. Wolfe didn't. "And you are here, why, Mr. Torrance?" "My client Mr. Hume wishes to handle this internally. Quietly. The suspicion, however, touches on several partners. Including myself. He insists on a third-party examination, discreet but thorough." Wolfe leaned back. "Hire a forensic accountant." We did. 3 of them. Their conclusions contradict one another. Then hire a 4th. Torrance's lips twitched. He insisted I come to you. Wolfe closed his eyes for a moment. "You were instructed to appeal to my vanity. Or perhaps my curiosity. I trust you brought bait." Torrance reached into his briefcase again and slid out a thin manila folder. Inside were 2 sheets of dense, formal print and a small ivory envelope. I opened it before Wolfe could snatch it away. Typed on stationery so expensive it practically whispered in cursive, the note was succinct: Mr. Wolfe, a crime is occurring under my nose. Not theft of money though that too, but theft of purpose, of integrity. If you can follow figures as you do words, help me. Not for profit, but to restore what is quietly being ruined. Emery Hume Wolfe's eyes stayed on the note for a beat longer than usual. Then he said, Mr. Torrance, I charge a daily fee and expenses. If I accept this, you'll be invoiced for both. Torrance nodded. I'll require the full partnership ledger for the last 2 years, all memoranda relating to internal disbursements, and a list of all partners and their roles. Archie will come by tomorrow morning. Understood. One last thing, Wolfe added. You will not mention to anyone that you have hired me. Not even your client. That may be complicated. Indeed, Wolfe said, as is true. Good day. Torrance stood, hesitated like he wanted to say something further, then thought better of it and left. I waited until the front door clicked shut before I spoke. You don't like lawyers? No, I do not. But you're taking the case? Yes. Why? Wolfe picked up the note again. Because that, he said, tapping the page, was not written by a man who fears scandal. It was written by a man who fears irrelevance. That was all I got out of him before he told me to go bother Fritz. But I knew one thing already: a storm had just stepped politely through our door, and Wolfram was quietly intrigued. You can always tell when the brownstone has been violated. Not burglarized, mind you. Wolfe has a steel sense for physical boundaries. But I mean violated in the spiritual sense. The kind that makes Wolfe chew a bit slower at dinner and raise his voice 1 decibel when discussing orchids. That's the brownstone disturbed, not in shambles, just fractionally out of tune. The morning after Claude Torrance's visit, I took my marching orders, delivered over a second bottle of beer the night before, and headed out to collect the required documents from the firm's office on East 52nd. I was met in the lobby by a young associate who looked like he'd been bred in a test tube labeled Yale. He handed me the files with the enthusiasm of a man delivering live explosives and then practically sprinted away. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the plant rooms with Theodore, which meant I had exactly 2 hours to start sifting through the ledger pages before he'd descend and demand lunch like a Roman senator expecting a feast. I spread the materials across my desk in the front room: year-end tallies, partner withdrawals, investment notes, and a master ledger that seemed to be rewritten by a committee of accountants on sedatives. It wasn't long before I started noticing something weird, not fraudulent exactly, but definitely squirrely. There were monthly entries marked as reserve equity reallocations, usually innocuous stuff that firms shuffle to balance their books. But this particular set had a flair for inconsistency. The amount always just under 90 quas being pulled and restored under different line items, sometimes through partner accounts, other times through a generic operational buffer field. Each time, the names attached varied slightly. Torrance, Greaves, Hume. Even a fifth name: Ellen Varn, junior partner. No explanations. No pattern. I was still staring at one of the fuzzier entries when Fritz peeked in and announced that lunch was ready. And not just any lunch: lamb medallions in rosemary juice, which meant Wolfe had already started sharpening his appetite and, more importantly, his interest in the case. After lunch, we met in the office. Wolfe took the armchair with the air of a man settling into a confession booth, and I handed him the summarized pages I'd marked up in red pencil. He scanned them, humming a little. Not musically. Wolfe doesn't hum in keys, but in a low grumble that meant he was mentally organizing data. I waited, leaned against the desk, trying not to smirk. "Notice anything?" I asked. He lifted a finger without looking up. "Do not patronize me." Perished the thought. After a moment he set the papers aside. "They are laundering their own equity. Reallocating partnership funds through indirect mechanisms. Not embezzlement/consensual misrepresentation. Sounds cozy. It's not criminal unless one party objects. Emery Hume, I believe, has objected." I nodded. "Then why not go public? Lawyers aren't shy when it comes to legalese and retribution." "Because," Wolfe said, "this is not about the money. Hume is not calling us to retrieve a sum. He is calling us to retrieve a principle." Which, coming from Wolfe, was like hearing a shark discuss marine ethics. The first true disruption arrived that evening. It was around 7:15 p.m. when the doorbell rang again. That late, it's either a fool, a client, or a mistake. I opened it to find a woman in a forest green coat, damp from the drizzle, clutching a leather-bound notebook like a lifeline. "Is Mr. Wolfe available?" she asked. "My name is Ellen Varn. The fifth partner." The name from the ledger. The ghost entry. She didn't wait to be invited in. She crossed the threshold like someone entering a confessional, her eyes flicking around the front room like it might implode. I led her into the office. Wolfe was reading a monograph on Byzantine food preservation, but he put it aside the moment I said her name. "Miss Varn," he said. "You've come unannounced." "Yes," she replied, breathless. "I had to. I couldn't wait. Something's wrong. Something happened today that made me afraid." Wolfe didn't blink. "Sit." She did. Her hands were trembling. "I think Mr. Hume is planning something drastic. He cancelled 2 appointments today. And when I tried to speak with him, he shut the door in my face. He's never done that before. I'm worried he might be preparing to blow the whistle on the firm or worse." "Why come to me?" Wolfe asked. "Because you were mentioned." Now we had his full attention. "He told Metwo days ago if anything strange happens, or if he stops communicating, should contact you immediately." He didn't elaborate. Just said, "Wolfe will understand." Wolfe closed his eyes for a moment. "And did he give you this?" He gestured at the notebook she was clutching. She blinked. "No. This is mine. But it might help." She slid it across the desk. I caught a glimpse of handwritten notes, meeting times, and partner interactions. One page was marked with an asterisk and a date: last Friday. A brief summary underneath read: Claude met Greaves alone after board review. Room 4B. Sounded heated. Mentioned realignment. Wolfe didn't open the notebook. Not yet. He let it sit, like a time bomb waiting for the correct moment to be triggered. "You will return to your firm tomorrow," Wolfe instructed her, "and behave as though this visit never happened. Speak to no one. Observe everything." She nodded. Wolfe waved her out. I escorted her to the door and watched her disappear into the mist like a character from a French noir. Back in the office, Wolfe finally opened the notebook. "Realignment," he said quietly. "A bureaucratic euphemism, usually. Unless it's a threat." I leaned forward. "You think Hume's in danger?" "I think," Wolfe replied, "that danger is already in motion. And we've just been officially entangled." I sat back. The brownstone was no longer a sanctuary. Not with anonymous notes, secret meetings, and trembling visitors. Wolfe hadn't left his chair, hadn't raised his voice, but the room felt a degree colder. This case wasn't just about numbers. It was about leverage. About who held it, who feared it, and who might be willing to do anything to preserve it. The brownstone had been disturbed. And Nero Wolfe had accepted the invitation. The next morning, Wolfe ordered eggs scrambled with chervil and chives. I knew the chervil meant he was thinking. That herb only made the cut when Wolfe was dabbling in abstraction, the culinary equivalent of polishing a monocle. Over breakfast, we didn't speak much. Wolfe was chewing through his eggs. I was chewing through the implications of Ellen Varne's visit. The fact that she brought a notebook didn't surprise me. The fact that it was helpful did. By 9:15, I was back on the move. Wolfe handed me a list of cream-colored stationery with his signature thick black ink. 5 names, 5 assignments. The partnership of Bartleby, Hume and Torrance had more than 3 names. It turned out though only 3 were carved into the oak paneling of the lobby. The full cast was this one. Emery Hume senior partner, the client, and apparent moral compass of the firm. 2. Claude Torrance the original visitor, sleek, composed, and deliberately vague. 3. Frederick Greaves the third name on the wall, allegedly the most financially savvy of the trio. 4. Ellen Varne junior partner, quiet, sharp, and too smart to be waving red flags without cause. 5. Lucas Bartleby, the firm's founding name, retired from active law practice but is still listed on the masthead. Wolfe wanted temperament, habits, relationships, and potential grievances. Not dirt unless it came prepackaged in motive. I'd barely tied my tie when Wolfe summoned Saul Panzer to pick up a second line of inquiry. If Wolfe was calling Saul, he didn't just smell smoke, he figured the fire had already burned through a wall or two. I started with the easiest lead, Claude Torrance. It's always a joy revisiting someone who's already practiced their lies once. Torrance met me in a glass-walled conference room at the firm's Midtown address. Same pinstripe, different tie. I've already provided everything necessary, he said, not quite smiling. If there's anything more, Mr. Wolfe knows how to reach me. Yeah, but he prefers to outsource the charm offensive. You're welcome. Torrance gave me a brittle look. I pressed. What's your take on Varne? She's meticulous. Unflappable. She manages our compliance reviews. Friendly with Hume? I'd say respectful. He mentored her early on. I waited. Nothing more came. And Greaves? Another pause. Ambitious. Exacting. We don't always agree. That was as close to a confession as I'd get from Torrance. I jotted down cordial contempt next to his name. Next, I dropped by a private club on Lexington where Greaves took his breakfasts. It was one of those wood-paneled dens where business executives and ex-governors share overpriced grapefruit halves and opinions no one asked for. Greaves was all bone structure and clenched politeness. His handshake was limp, but his voice had an edge you could shave with. We've had some accounting concerns, he admitted. Emery tends to exaggerate. He's idealistic. About money? About principles. He lifted his coffee cup. It's not theft. He knows that. Then what is it? Greaves looked up. It's resistance. Resistance to change. I tucked that line into my back pocket. From there, I looped back to Ellen Varn, who agreed to meet in the marble garden courtyard behind the firm building. She looked more tired than she had the day before but still composed. "I found something else," she said, handing me a small card. It was an old appointment reminder, handwritten, from Hume's assistant. A single-line lunch with L.B. Noon, Tuesday. "Lucas Bartleby?" I asked. She nodded. "He hasn't been active in years. But Hume met him this week. Privately." "What for?" She gave a small shake of the head. "Hume's been growing restless. I think he wanted perspective. Or support." She nodded again. "If he's planning something he'll want Bartleby on his side." Which led me, as all good leads eventually do, to a man I hadn't expected to chase Lucas Bartleby. He lived in a Park Avenue apartment that made my whole building look like a broom closet. Retired lawyers don't usually get to sit on gold cushions unless they once advised someone who prints money. Bartleby welcomed me with the warmth of an undertaker and waved off my badge of introduction like it was a coupon flyer. "Emery came to me about 10 days ago," he said, motioning for me to sit. He was distraught. He spoke of a breach of ethics. He said the partnership ledger was a cipher for greed. His words? Bartleby gave me a look. Not precisely. But the sentiment was loud and clear. Did he say who he suspected? No. And I didn't ask. That wasn't my place. Then why did he come to you? Bartleby leaned back. Because he thought I could meditate. He wanted to resolve it quietly. And? Bartleby folded his hands. He called me yesterday. Asked to meet again. But when I arrived, he wasn't there. His assistant said he'd left early. Did you find that strange? Of course. Emery's never late. Especially not when trying to save the firm from itself. There it was. A circle tightening. Greaves and Torrance keeping up appearances. Varn peering into shadows. Bartleby trying to steady the ship from retirement. And Hume, the eye of the storm, had just changed course. I returned to the brownstone just after 6. Wolfe was already in the office, a chilled bottle of Gewürztraminer sweating on the desk and a single orchid beside it. He didn't look up as I entered. "Well?" he asked. "They all have motives. Torrance wants silence. Greaves wants change. Varn wants clarity. Bartleby wants peace. And Hume, well, he wanted Wolfe." Wolfe nodded. "That is a conclusion, not a fact." He poured himself a glass of wine. "No murder yet, Archie." "Give it time," I said. "We're dealing with lawyers." Wolfe didn't laugh. He rarely does. But the corner of his mouth twitched. "Tomorrow," he said, "you will return to the firm. Look not for paper trails but for pressure points. The structure of a partnership is built on consensus. Find the cracks." I saluted, then collapsed into the red chair. Outside, the sky was bruising with night. Inside, the brownstone held its breath. We weren't just circling suspects now. We were inside the storm, listening for the crack that would bring the whole thing down. The next morning, the city woke up damp and irritable. I grabbed my coat, polished my shoes, and tucked a notepad into my jacket pocket before heading to the brownstone's front door. Wolfe was already in the plant rooms when I left, surrounded by 1,000 orchids and one other constant silence. That's how he likes it when I'm out collecting the noise for him. The first thing Wolfe wanted was a sense of rhythm, called it the tempo of tension at the law firm. Who speaks to whom? Who avoids the elevator at the same time every day? Who's whispering too much or not at all? You'd be surprised what you can pull from tone, posture, and glances. Especially in a law office where the real crime usually isn't what's written down, but what's left unsaid. At 9:28 a.m. I strolled through the polished glass doors of Bartleby, Hume and Torrance with the casual confidence of someone who wasn't being paid hourly. The receptionist was new, young, blonde, and indifferent. "Can I help you?" "Let's hope so," I said. "Archie Goodwin. I'm here to meet with Ellen Varn." She didn't flinch, just picked up the phone and buzzed someone. A few moments later, Ellen stepped out into the lobby. She had swapped her green coat for a gray tailored suit that looked as sharp as her vocabulary. She didn't greet me with a smile, just a nod, the kind that said, "Follow but don't speak." She led me to a small conference room with heavy bookshelves and no windows. Probably where they keep clients who can't be trusted with distractions. "There's been a development," she said once the door closed. I pulled out my notebook. "Don't tell me." Torrance filed a restraining order against curiosity. "No," she said. "Emery Hume didn't show up to work. Again." My pen froze. 2 days in a row. She nodded. "And his assistant says he called late last night to cancel everything indefinitely. He gave no reason." "That's not good." "No," she agreed. "It's not very good." I asked for access to Hume's office. She hesitated but finally agreed. 5 minutes. "That's all I can give you." The office of Emery Hume was everything I expected and a few things I didn't. The desk was walnut, the bookshelves were organized by topic, and the air smelled faintly of pipe tobacco. There were no family photos, no awards, no ego-stroking trophies. Just books, papers, and a half-empty bottle of mineral water. I scanned the surfaces first. Neat. Too neat. There were 3 files stacked on his desk. One was labeled Audit Q4 Internal, the second Equity Disbursement September NOV, and the third had no label at all, just a single paper inside a signed receipt for a certified letter sent 3 days ago to someone named M. Grafton. "Who's Grafton?" I asked Ellen. "Outside counsel. He's handled legacy disputes for the firm in the past. He's old school." I copied down the address. There was one more thing tucked inside the top drawer, was a notepad. Most of the pages were blank. The top page had faint indentations from something that had been written and torn off. I didn't have a pencil handy, but Wolfe had taught me a trick years ago: shine light at a sharp angle and squint. Not elegant, but sometimes effective. I caught part of a phrase not safe. Ledgerproof. Ellen looked over my shoulder. "You think he left a message?" "I think he was preparing one." I didn't push further. I left the office the way I found it and told Ellen to keep an eye on anyone suddenly interested in cleaning up after ghosts. Next stop was the man with ambition and polish, Frederick Greaves. He wasn't in his office. According to his assistant, he was off-site, a sight as comforting as under surveillance. So I parked myself in the hallway and waited. Sometimes the best fieldwork is just loitering with intent. 35 minutes later, Greaves returned carrying a leather briefcase and a takeaway espresso. I intercepted him with the subtlety of a cattle prod. "Morning," I said. "Care to chat?" He blinked. "Mr. Goodwin." I wasn't aware we had an appointment. You're not under oath. Yet. That earned me a frown. But he led me into his office. I took a different tack this time. Wolfe calls it strategic contradiction. I dropped a quiet lie and watched how the subject reacted. Ellen Varn said you and Hume had a falling out last week. Something about a private meeting after hours? He hesitated. There. A slight twitch of the jaw. She said that? Sure did. He sat down slowly. We had a difference of opinion. Emery's become increasingly inflexible. He accuses others of opportunism, but refuses to see how the industry has evolved. By opportunism, do you mean embezzlement? He stared at me. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. He sighed. No funds were taken illegally. Emery wanted to restructure the profit-sharing formula. We disagreed. That's all. I let the silence linger, then rose. Thanks. If I need anything else, I'll be sure to ask before assuming. He didn't laugh. No one does when they realize the walls are getting closer. Before leaving the building, I called Saul Panzer. He was working his own angle. Wolfe had him digging into the firm's external associations, backdoor shell accounts, and any odd financial hiccups that hadn't made it into the formal ledgers. Saul confirmed something interesting. Grafton, the legacy lawyer, had received not one but 3 packages from the firm in the last week. 2 came from Hume. 1 from Torrance. That was enough to make Wolfe shift in his chair, figuratively speaking. Back at the brownstone, I delivered my notes with a sandwich and a side of skepticism. Wolfe read every page without interrupting, then asked for the name on the certified letter again. M. Grafton. He nodded. Archie, he said slowly, you will call Grafton tomorrow. Do not mention Torrance. Only say you are following up on correspondence from Emery Hume. Ask for a meeting. What if he says no? Then tell him Wolfe will make his absence a matter of record. That was Wolfe for youth, disguised as courtesy. Before I turned in, I asked him the obvious question. Do you think Hume's in hiding? Or something worse? Wolfe didn't answer immediately. He looked at the orchid on his desk, then out the window into the night. I think, he said, that Mr. Hume may have crossed a line of his own making. And lines, once crossed, are rarely erased without consequence. With that, he dismissed me. I didn't argue. The brownstone was quiet again, but it wasn't peace, it was tension holding its breath. Something was coming. And when it did, I had a feeling it wouldn't knock. In a house governed by order, nothing unsettles Nero Wolfe quite like disorder. So when I entered the office that morning and found Wolfe already seated, not just seated, but alert, fingers steepled under his chin and eyes fixed on the desk, I knew something was wrong. I closed the door behind me. You're early, I said. What happened? Did the orchids rebel? He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he nodded at the lower right drawer of his desk, one of the drawers he used for correspondence. Wolfe didn't want Fritz accidentally tidying. I stepped over and pulled it open. Inside was an empty envelope, once sealed, cream-colored and embossed with the firm's crest: Bartleby, Hume and Torrance. I picked it up. It was addressed in Wolfe's own handwriting, but without a recipient. I did not place that there, Wolfe said. Fritz? No. He would never. Nor have you, I presume. I'm innocent. This time. Wolfe exhaled, a slow, controlled breath. Then someone entered this office during the night or early morning and tampered with my files. I stared at the envelope. Tampered, or delivered. Not mutually exclusive. Note the position. Deliberate. Left for me to find. Which means either arrogance or desperation. I turned the envelope over. No content. Just the paper and a faint imprint where something had once been inside. Wolfe gestured toward the hallway. Check the front door lock. I did. Nothing broken. Nothing picked. I went around and checked the windows. Same. Whoever it was either had a key or used hands we'd never see on a doorknob. Back in the office, Wolfe was already on the phone with Saul Panzer, giving clipped, calm instructions that ended with, discreet surveillance on all known associates. Start with Frederick Greaves. I waited until he hung up. You think it was one of them? I asked. I think, Wolfe replied, someone believes the brownstone can be manipulated. That is a grievous error. We spent the next hour going over what might have been taken, altered, or more subtly planted. The files were intact. Nothing missing from our copy of the partnership ledger, the correspondence from Hume or Ellen Varne's notebook. But Wolfe's office is less about material than atmosphere. It felt off. That was enough. I decided to retrace steps. Someone had come in or made it look like they had. Either way, the game had escalated. First stop was the mailroom of Bartleby, Hume and Torrance. Firms like that don't just toss letters in a basket. Every delivery, incoming or outgoing, goes through a meticulously logged system. I bribed the clerk with a sandwich and a soda to pull 2 days' worth of records. And there it was. Yesterday morning, just after 900 a.m. An unmarked courier had picked up a sealed envelope for delivery. Destination? No address listed. Just N. Wolfe Confidential, hand delivery only. I got a description of the courier: tall, Cleanshaven, dark blue windbreaker, no company insignia. Probably a freelancer hired for the hour. The return signature? Initials F.G. Frederick Greaves. I left the building with that name burning in my head and dialed Wolfe from a payphone on 44th. He sent it, I said. Greaves. Delivered through a ghost courier, no traceable paper trail. The envelope matches. It was meant for you. Wolfe didn't hesitate. Return. Now. By the time I stepped into the brownstone again, Wolfe had Fritz checking all windows, testing the alarm system, and locking the office door behind him with a fresh key. In the office, Wolfe handed me an unusual glass of beer during business hours. This is not celebration, he said. It is clarity. Greaves sent that envelope to stage his own narrative. He wants us to believe he's cooperating. But there was nothing in it. Precisely. An empty gesture designed to imply confidence. It is meant to delay. I frowned. Delay what? Exposure. That afternoon, Wolfe dictated a letter carefully phrased and full of double-edged politeness requesting a full meeting with the firm's partners. Not the assistants, not the staff. Just Torrance, Greaves, Varne, and Bartleby. The note would be hand-delivered the next morning by me. But we didn't get that far without another complication. At precisely 6:05 p.m., Fritz knocked on the door. Behind him stood Saul Panzer, his coat dusted with late March sleet. "I have something," Saul said, stepping inside. Wolfe waved him to the red chair. Saul handed over a photo, black and white, grainy, taken from across the street. It showed Greaves in a diner on 3rd Avenue. With him sat a man I didn't recognize, bald, round-faced, with thick glasses and a bad tie. Between them on the table was a small brown envelope, nearly identical in size to the one found in Wolfe's drawer. "This was yesterday," Saul said. "They met again today. Same location, same man." "Identify him," Wolfe said. "I already did. Martin Grafton. The legacy lawyer." That twisted something in my stomach. So Greaves and Grafton are talking behind closed booths. Wolfe didn't respond. He was staring at the photo. Finally, he said, "Grafton is not a neutral recipient. He is a node." "A what?" Wolfe's voice turned cold. "A conduit. Between intent and execution." That was Wolfe speak, for this man's not just a lawyer's the kind who makes things disappear in plain sight. By the time Saul left, Wolfe had rearranged the cards on the metaphorical table. Hume had vanished, Varn was watching shadows, Greaves was sending decoy mail, and Grafton was playing both sides of a script no one wanted us to read. It was nearly 700 when the phone rang again. I picked it up. A low voice said, "Tell Mr. Wolfe I need to see him. Urgently." "Name?" "Bartleby. Lucas Bartleby." I paused. "He's not in," I said. "But I can meet you." "No. Only Wolfe." "I'll come to the brownstone." 1 hour. He hung up before I could object. Wolfe looked at me. "That," he said, "is what desperation sounds like." At 8:05 p.m. Lucas Bartleby arrived at our door, rain dripping from his fedora, eyes full of something Wolfe rarely respects. And as I closed the door behind him, I knew this case had just stopped being about ledgers. It had become about survival. Lucas Bartleby entered the brownstone like a man who'd just come from a séance and was still unconvinced the ghost hadn't followed him home. He stood in the foyer for a full 10 seconds, removing his hat with a kind of stunned reverence, his eyes darting to the crown molding as if trying to memorize every line in case the walls collapsed. Fritz offered to take his coat. He declined. Wolfe didn't rise when Bartleby entered the office. He never does. But there was a certain tightening around his eyes as he watched the old lawyer approach the red chair. "You are agitated," Wolfe said flatly. Bartleby sank down like a man surrendering to gravity. "Yes. And for good reason. I've come from Emery Hume's apartment." My pen paused in midair. Wolfe merely raised one brow. "He wasn't there?" I asked. "No. But someone else was." Bartleby leaned forward, both elbows on his knees. "I arrived unannounced. I rang the bell. No answer. The door was locked, but I noticed a sliver of light under it, so I knocked again. I was about to leave when a man opened the door and said he was with building security. Claimed Hume had requested a temporary hold on visitors. Said he'd moved out for a few days." "And you believed him?" Wolfe asked. "I didn't," Bartleby said. "The man wasn't in uniform. He had a badge clipped to his coat, but it was generic, no company, no ID number. He was trying to appear official. He wasn't." "Did you report this to the police?" "No," he said quickly. "Not yet." Wolfe gave a small grunt. "Because you suspect someone within your firm is responsible. And you don't want outside eyes until you understand the shape of the threat." Bartleby looked down. Yes. I stepped forward. Describe him. Tall. Early 40s. Sandy hair. American. Confident posture. Didn't flinch when I said I was Hume's friend. Just told me to call back in a week. Wolfe steepled his fingers. Archie, he said, called Saul. I picked up the phone and passed along the description. Saul didn't need more than that. He'd file it away, cross-reference it, and probably have a name by morning. When I hung up, Bartleby was still speaking slowly, methodically, like a man testifying to a jury that didn't want to be there. Something's happening. Something internal. I believe Emery discovered more than he told me. That's why he reached out to you. He wanted a final move before the board tried to silence him. And now he's either hiding or he's been made to. Wolfe didn't blink. He left no note. None that I saw. Yet you came here rather than to Torrance. Because Claude's been avoiding me for days. I left 3 messages. Not a single reply. That, Wolfe noted aloud, was telling. Bartleby stayed another 20 minutes, repeating details, replaying his brief exchange at the apartment door, even offering the address and floor number. Wolfe noted it all but gave no promises. By the time Bartleby left, the rain had slowed outside, but the pressure inside the brownstone had thickened like soup. The moment the door shut, Wolfe said, the man Bartleby encountered was not from the building. I nodded. You think Greaves sent him? Wolfe waved his hand. Possibly. But not alone. This is becoming orchestral. Multiple instruments, one conductor. I leaned against the bookcase. You think Hume's alive? Yes. That confident? No. That's hopeful. That was rare from Wolfe admitting hope. It meant he sensed we weren't just dealing with accounting tricks and boardroom backstabbing anymore. Something had shifted. The stakes were now more than reputational, they were personal. The phone rang at 9:32 p.m. I grabbed it. Yeah. It was Saul. His voice was low. Found him. Who? The guy Bartleby saw. Name's Ray Donnellan. Freelance asset recovery. Works under contract for a number of quiet clients, divorce attorneys, corporate trustees, even the occasional legal cleanup crew. What's he doing outside Hume's apartment? That's the question. Saul gave me his last known address and a list of the agencies Donnellan was loosely affiliated with. No official payroll, but several gray paper trails connecting him to the firm's legacy handler Martin Grafton. I hung up and relayed everything to Wolfe. His expression didn't change, but his next sentence locked the room in place. We move at once. Meaning me, of course. Wolfe doesn't move unless the orchids are in revolt. By 1015, I was parked in a borrowed sedan half a block from Donnellan's walk-up in the East 70s. Lights were on in the top unit. Curtains drawn. No movement visible. I waited. At 10:41, a figure stepped out, coat pulled tight, collar raised, a man moving with purpose but not haste. Donnellan. I followed him south. He didn't take a cab. Didn't call anyone. Just walked. Like a man with a destination and instructions. He arrived at a second-floor office suite on East 60th. The sign on the door said Grafton and Associates Dispute Resolution. A euphemism if I ever saw one. I didn't follow him in. Just waited. Took photos. Logged the time. He stayed 27 minutes. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had waited for a rare occurrence. I gave him the photos and the time stamps. He stared at them for a long minute. Then, quietly, it's a containment effort. Grafton? Yes. Greaves too, possibly Torrance. They're not just trying to erase Hume, they're preparing to weather the fallout. If Hume returns, they'll spin it. If he doesn't, they'll write it. And us? We are the variable they didn't calculate. He leaned back. We will now accelerate. I nodded. Saul? Have him monitor Donnellan and Grafton. Around the clock. And Varn? Call her. Tell her she's in danger. That gave me pause. Danger, how? Not physical, Wolfe said. Reputational. If Hume doesn't resurface, they'll need a scapegoat. And she's the lowest-ranking name on the list. Precisely. I went to the phone. As it rang, I looked out into the quiet night. The city was dim and hushed, but not asleep. And certainly not innocent. Whatever had started with an $87,000 discrepancy had unraveled into something far more dangerous. Wolfe was assembling the final pieces. But I could feel something was about to break. It's a curious thing to watch Nero Wolfe go on the offensive without leaving his chair. There's no shouting, no pacing, no table pounding. Just a few words placed precisely, like weights on a scale, and the world shifts around him. Strategy, to Wolfe, isn't an action. It's architecture. And that morning, as the city yawned awake and the March drizzle clung to every surface, Wolfe began building. I had barely finished breakfast when he summoned me to the office. He was at his desk, arms folded, eyes on the globe in the corner, though not spinning it. Wolfe doesn't spin globes. He examines them. Archie, he said, call Mr. Torrance. Inform him I require his presence at the brownstone at 3 o'clock this afternoon. I frowned. Just him? For now. And if he declines? Wolfe's voice dropped half a degree. He won't. I made the call. Torrance didn't argue. Didn't even pretend to be surprised. He simply asked whether he should bring any documents. Just yourself, I told him. And maybe your conscience. At 3:02 p.m., Torrance arrived. Same precision-cut suit. Same unsettling calm. He walked into the office like a man convinced the battle hadn't started yet. Wolfe didn't rise. He never does. But he did glance up as Torrance entered, which in his book counts as a standing ovation. Mr. Torrance, he said, thank you for your punctuality. Please, be seated. Torrance did, crossing one leg neatly over the other. I've taken the liberty of consulting several parties, Wolfe continued, regarding the internal operations of your firm. What I've found suggests a pattern. An intention to reallocate funds under the guise of operational flexibility, routed through line items scrubbed of personal attribution. Torrance raised an eyebrow. Those are serious words. They are serious facts, Wolfe replied. The figures speak. You merely choose not to hear them. I watched Torrance closely. He didn't blink. He didn't shift. But there was a fractional tightening at the corners of his mouth, a sign of stress for a man otherwise composed like a stained glass window. Where is Emery Hume? Wolfe asked. Torrance blinked. Once. I don't know. You did, Wolfe said. Until recently. Silence. It stretched. Then, softly, Torrance said, he left of his own volition. Did he? Wolfe asked. Or was he persuaded? Another pause. Then Mr. Wolfe, I am here as a courtesy. Not as a defendant. You are here because the storm you helped create has veered off course. And because I possess leverage you underestimated. Torrance stood. This conversation is over. Wolfe remained still. I would caution you, he said, against confusing discretion with safety. You've crossed into a territory where exposure is not just a risk, it's imminent. Torrance left without another word. I turned to Wolfe. That was vague, even for you. He gave a small grunt. I gave him one last opportunity to retreat. He refused. Why? Because he believes control is the same as protection. He believes whoever holds the ledger holds the power. Wolfe tapped the side of his desk. He is mistaken. The next call Wolfe made was to Saul Panzer. Begin the public phase, he told him. Contact Grafton directly. Let him know the envelope delivered to my desk was photographed. And that its timing and contents or lack thereof will be part of a formal report. Saul didn't ask questions. Just said, understood, and hung up. Wolfe turned to me. Archie, you will pay another visit to Ellen Varn. Bring her here. Tell her the walls are closing in. She won't like that. She shouldn't. An hour later, I was back in the lobby of Bartleby, Hume and Torrance. Ellen met me in the hallway near the conference rooms, arms crossed, face tense. I've heard, she said. Torrance was summoned. You're next, I said. Bring whatever files you have. Wolfe wants to speak with you directly. She looked around, lowered her voice. There's more. Since yesterday, 2 internal memos have been pulled from the shared drive. Financial Oversight Communications. I checked with our IT department. They were manually deleted by someone with high-level access. Greaves? I asked. Or Torrance. But Torrance has legal deniability. Greaves are more Hanson. We returned to the brownstone just before 6. Fritz had dinner simmering beef bourguignon, but Wolfe waved it off. Later, he said, Miss Varn. Ellen stepped into the office. Wolfe studied her for a full 15 seconds before speaking. Miss Varn, you are now at the center of a narrative you did not write. But your role is no longer passive. She remained composed. I understand. Do you? Wolfe's voice was quieter now, almost a whisper. If Emery Hume resurfaces, your testimony may shield him. If he does not, your silence will protect the wrong people. Ellen nodded. Then I won't be silent. Wolfe turned to me. Archie, prepare a statement for her. She will sign it here. Not yet for the police, but sufficient to establish sequence and motive. We worked for the next hour. Wolfe dictated, I typed, Ellen corrected minor phrasing but made no changes to substance. At 7:12 p.m., she signed it. You will return to your office tomorrow, Wolfe said, and behave as usual. But you will no longer speak to Greaves or Torrance without documentation. No verbal exchanges. And Bartleby? If he contacts you again, direct him to me. As she stood to leave, Wolfe added, Miss Varnby was aware. Greaves will not go quietly. She left, a little paler but still composed. I sat down opposite Wolfe. "You've positioned everyone." He nodded. "Almost. You're setting up for the office gathering." "Yes." "But not yet?" "No. Not until I have Hume." That stopped me. "You think we'll find him?" Wolfe looked down at the orchids on his desk. "I think," he said, "he wants to be found. But on his terms." Then, as if punctuating the statement, the phone rang. I picked it up. A calm voice said, "Tell Mr. Wolfe the ledger isn't the key. The erasure is." "Name?" But the line had gone dead. I turned back to Wolfe. He was already pouring beer. And somewhere in the distance, the final move had just been made. There's a kind of electricity that runs through the brownstone when Wolfe schedules an office gathering. Not the bolt-of-lightning kind, more like static clinging to your thoughts. The chairs are angled ever so slightly. The windows are latched. Fritz brews a special pot of coffee, not for guests, but because Wolfe doesn't want interruptions. And well, I make sure there's a notepad in my pocket, a clean handkerchief folded just so, and the doors are oiled to avoid even the smallest creak. The invitations, if you could call them, that were sent out the night before. Delivered by hand. From Nero Wolfe himself. And when Wolfe signs a summons, people show up. Even lawyers. By 2:30, Fritz had finished vacuuming the front hall for the third time. By 2:40, I was in the office, straightening the corner of Wolfe's blotter while he pretended not to notice. At exactly 2:57, the first knock came. Frederick Greaves. Dark suit, crisp tie, expression flat as a courtroom ceiling. I opened the door. "Welcome to the lion's den." He stepped past me with a faint sneer. "Is that what we're calling it now?" "Depends which side of the table you're on." Greaves didn't reply. He walked straight into the office and took a seat in the chair second from the left, the one people choose when they don't want to appear confrontational, but still want to be noticed. Torrance followed 3 minutes later. He nodded at me like a man greeting a valet, then brushed invisible lint from his lapel and entered without fanfare. He and Greaves exchanged a brief glance, not quite friendly, not quite hostile. Just two men aware of each other's capacity for damage. Ellen Varn arrived at 305, a minute behind schedule, which was probably intentional. She gave me a small nod as she passed, eyes alert, jaw tight. And finally, at 3:11, Lucas Bartleby arrived. He looked older than he had just days earlier. The rain hadn't returned, but his coat was still damp. Maybe he was sweating something other than weather. They all sat. Wolfe remained silent for a full 30 seconds, long enough to make them listen before he'd even begun. Then, calmly, he spoke. "Thank you for coming. I have convened this meeting not as a courtesy, but as a culmination. You are all here because you are entangled willingly or not in a matter that threatens the integrity of your firm, your reputations, and potentially your freedom." Torrance folded his hands. "Mr. Wolfe, we were told this was a consultation." "You were told nothing," Wolfe said. "You were summoned." That shut him up. Wolfe turned to Greaves. "Mr. Greaves, you authorized the destruction of 2 internal memos from the shared drive earlier this week. Do you deny it?" Greaves stiffened. "I don't recall authorizing any such thing." "You don't recall. That is not a denial. I'm saying there's no proof." "There is," Wolfe replied. 2 snapshots taken by your junior associate before deletion. Dated, timestamped, and verified. I have them. Greaves said nothing. Mr. Torrance, Wolfe continued, you sent an envelope to me under false pretenses, using a third-party courier with no business affiliation. The contents were blank. It was a gesture meant to feign cooperation while establishing a narrative of compliance. You intended it to be found. You miscalculated. Torrance shifted in his seat. You have no evidence. I have the courier's delivery log. I have a copy of the envelope. I have a sworn statement from the firm's mailroom clerk. You may try to debate implications, but not facts. Wolfe turned slightly toward Ellen. Miss Varn. You are the only partner here who has not attempted to mislead, obscure, or delay. That makes you the most vulnerable. And also, the most valuable. She sat up straighter. What happens now? I will explain, Wolfe said. But first, Mr. Bartleby. The old man flinched. Wolfe continued. You met with Emery Hume twice before his disappearance. The second meeting was interrupted. You found a man at Hume's apartment posing as building security. Yes, Bartleby said. I told you you did. But you did not tell me that after that visit, you contacted Grafton. Or that you delivered to him, via Donnellan, a packet of notes from Hume's private files. Bartleby's face drained. I didn't spare myself, Wolfe said. You believed it would contain an explanation. Instead, it contained a threat. Greaves leaned forward. A threat? Wolfe's voice lowered. A single-page affidavit. Dated. Signed by Hume. Stating that in the event of his disappearance, a copy of the revised partner's ledger untainted, with annotations will be sent to the State Bar Association. That landed hard. Greaves tried to recover. He never had such a file. Wolfe cut him off. He did. And he left it in the care of someone he trusted. Torrance's eyes narrowed. You? No, Wolfe said. He trusted the erasure. They all looked confused. Wolfe let the silence hang before elaborating. There are no new ledgers. No files. No report. Hume's strategy was not to produce evidence, but to trigger paranoia. He altered just enough records to make all of you uncertain who knew what. Then he vanished. He staged this? Torrance stammered. Partly, Wolfe said. He feared exposure, but more than that, he feared irrelevance. So he created a riddle no one could solve without revealing their own guilt. I glanced around the room. Varn's eyes were wide but focused. Greaves looked like someone had unplugged his internal battery. Torrance had gone stiff. Bartleby simply looked tired. Wolfe leaned back. But now the riddle is mine. And I do not like being lied to. He let that sit for a moment, then rang the bell. Fritz entered with a tray of signed statements, copies from Ellen, copies of the mail logs, courier records, photographs from Saul, and the memorandum screenshots. All neatly bound. These will be delivered to the appropriate oversight boards within the hour, Wolfe said. Unless what? Greaves snapped. Unless Hume reappears. Voluntarily. Publicly. Within 24 hours. Torrance scoffed. You think we can control that? No, Wolfe said. But you can make an appeal. He turned to Ellen. Miss Varn will coordinate. You will each send a joint statement requesting Hume's safe return. That's your chance at mitigation. And if we don't? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Then you will each be held accountable not for theft but for cowardice. He rose slightly, not enough to be standing, just enough to show the room that the game was now over. Good day, gentlemen. Miss Varne, please remain. One by one, they left. Greaves didn't speak. Torrance muttered something about legal counsel. Bartleby avoided eye contact. When the door finally clicked shut behind them, Wolfe let out a long, slow breath. I asked, "You really think Hume will come back?" Wolfe didn't answer. He just stared at the ledger on his desk, the original one, annotated, smudged with coffee, and sealed in a plain brown envelope addressed to no one. And he waited. At precisely 1018 the following morning, the brownstone phone rang. I was in the front room, flipping through a copy of the Ledger Journal that Wolfe never read but liked having visible on the coffee table. I picked up the receiver with my usual charm. Archie Goodwin, voice of reason. Who's calling? There was a pause, then a gravelly voice replied, "Put Wolfe on. Tell him it's Emery Hume." I didn't blink. I just said, "Hold," and walked without rushing into the office. Wolfe looked up. He knew from my expression that it wasn't a telemarketer. "Hume," I said simply. Wolfe motioned. I handed him the receiver. He didn't speak for the first 5 seconds. Then, in a tone just this side of indifferent, he said, "You've taken your time." A pause. "Yes. Archie will fetch you." He hung up and turned to me. "He's ready." "Where?" "A private residence in Morningside Heights. Under the name Browning." "Alone?" "He says yes." "Trust him?" "No." I was out the door in less than 5 minutes, the cab cutting through mid-morning traffic while my mind churned over everything we'd uncovered: Torrance's posturing, Greaves's evasions, Bartleby's secrets, Grafton's involvement. They had moved pieces across the board, but they hadn't controlled the board. That belonged to Wolfe. The address was a red brick townhouse tucked between a shuttered bookstore and a vegan cafe. Hume answered the door himself. He looked older, more than a week older. His hair was slightly longer, his jacket hung loose on his shoulders, and the whites of his eyes were mottled red. But he smiled when he saw me. "You're early." "No, you're late," I said. "And you've got a lot of people sharpening knives in your absence." He nodded. "Let's go." Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting upright in his chair, the orchids watered, the air thick with unspoken judgment. Fritz brought in coffee but left it untouched. This wasn't a moment for beverages. Hume stepped into the office, removed his coat, and sat. He looked from Wolfe to me, then back to Wolfe. "You figured it out?" Wolfe gave a single nod. "Of course," Hume said. "You would." "Explain," Wolfe commanded. Hume folded his hands. 3 months ago, I discovered a discrepancy in a recurring fund, slightly altered in each quarterly ledger, being passed through reallocated equity shares. At first, I thought it was just poor documentation. Then I traced it back to Torrance and Greaves. Torrance had created a shell consultancy Waltham and Alder. Greaves routed quarterly disbursements into it through back-coded invoices. I interrupted. "Why?" "To shift firm profits off the books. Reduce taxes. Build a slush fund for client accommodations." Wolfe frowned. "Illegal?" Hume hesitated. Grey. Certainly unethical. And the others? Bartleby didn't know. Ellen Varne suspected. But she lacked access to confirm it. I gave her small clues enough to steer her without dragging her in. And then? I asked. Hume leaned back. I confronted Greaves. He denied everything. Said I was being sentimental. Claimed flexibility was necessary in modern practice. That's when I knew he wouldn't stop. I needed leverage. You created the ledger riddle, Wolfe said. Yes. And vanished. Yes. Wolfe closed his eyes. So they would panic. Tear up their own trail trying to stay ahead of a ghost. Hume nodded. And so they would call you. Wolfe opened his eyes. That was your real play. You were the one person Torrance wouldn't try to buy. The one man Greaves couldn't intimidate. I gave them just enough rope. The rest, I knew, you'd arrange. I leaned against the fireplace. But what if Wolfe hadn't taken the case? I was counting on his pride. Wolfe didn't deny it. Silence stretched a moment, thick with aftermath. Then Wolfe said, "You've orchestrated a fraud not for gain, but as a bluff. That will not shield you from scrutiny." "I'm not asking for a shield," Hume said. "Only an ending." Wolfe tapped his fingers against the armrest. "You will make a public statement," he said. "Today. Declaring your absence voluntary. Announcing your retirement, and the appointment of an external audit. You will name Miss Varne as your successor. And you will include the phrase, 'Cooperation with the Bar Association is ongoing.'" "That last part is not optional," Wolfe said. Hume sighed. "Understood." "And Torrance?" "Will step down. Quietly." "Greaves?" Hume hesitated. "He won't." Wolfe nodded. "Then he'll be removed." I raised an eyebrow. "How?" "Hume's notes," Wolfe said. "The originals. Delivered this morning to the State Ethics Board via Panzer. Duplicates go to the Times and 2 legal journals if anything untoward occurs. That was Wolfe's insurance policy. A fuse waiting for fire." Hume stood. "I assume this ends the case." "No," Wolfe said. "This ends your part in it. The rest, the restitution, the audit, the reputational consequences that remain." Hume gave a small bow and left the room with the gait of a man carrying both freedom and burden in equal measure. When the door closed, I let out a slow breath. Well, that was tidy. Wolfe grimaced. "Justice rarely is." I flopped into the red chair. "He's lucky he called you." "No," Wolfe said. "He was lucky Ellen Varne did." Outside, the sky was clearing. The rain had stopped. The city was back to its usual rhythm, corrupt, brilliant, and humming. Inside, the brownstone was quiet again. But not finished. Not yet. The storm had passed, but Wolfe never trusted clear skies. Not in the world of orchids or human behavior. Both, he liked to say, looked healthiest right before they withered. And after the week we'd had missing partners, doctored ledgers, corporate stagecraft worthy of a Broadway producer, he had every reason to expect a few leftover tremors. Still, the quiet felt real. 3 days after Emery Hume returned from self-imposed exile and held a press conference to announce his retirement and the launch of a third-party audit, the legal waters began to still. Ellen Varn was named interim managing partner. Torrance issued a resignation letter, framed in the language of strategic divergence. Greaves, unsurprisingly, refused to step down. But a few sternly worded nudges from the Bar Association and a well-timed leak to a legal affairs column persuaded the firm's board to place him on leave pending a vote of confidence. Wolfe's fingerprints weren't on any of it. That's how he liked it. He never takes credit, not directly. That's my department. And this case? This one was Wolfe at his most Wolfe, immovable, insulated, and several moves ahead of everyone else on the board. It was a Thursday afternoon when I stepped into the office carrying the day's mail, mostly junk, one envelope from a culinary society Wolfe had once insulted and then promptly joined, and a smaller package addressed in tight, elegant script. I handed it over. Wolfe opened it with a letter opener as sharp as his sense of consequence. Inside was a short note on vellum paper, and a small, rectangular object wrapped in linen. The note read, Mr. Wolfe, thank you for restoring what others tried to unmake. Enclosed is something from my personal archive. It is not valuable, but it is honest. E.H. The object was a fountain pen. Scratched, well-worn, not engraved. Just an ordinary pen that had once likely signed very unordinary documents. Wolfe set it down on the desk without comment. Across from him, I leaned back. I suppose that's his version of a gold watch. Pomp would be inappropriate, Wolfe said. But a relic from the trenches? That's poetic. He didn't answer, which I took as agreement. Fritz appeared a few minutes later to announce lunch. Duck à l'orange, braised endives, and a chocolate soufflé that had demanded no fewer than 2 trial runs. Wolfe rose finally and headed to the dining room. I followed, but not before taking a final look at the pen. A quiet trophy for a victory no one would ever applaud publicly. At lunch, Wolfe was almost cheerful. By Wolfe standards, that meant he spoke in full sentences and corrected me only once when I said creme fraiche instead of sour cream's fancy cousin. We discussed tomatoes, late spring blights, and the tragic vulgarity of frozen tarragon. But I knew it was coming. Wolfe's reflections don't arrive on cue. They arrive when he's ready, and only when the weight of the world has been filed, shelved, and double-indexed. Sure enough, over his second glass of Gewürztraminer, he looked up. Archie, he said, there is something particularly vile about betrayal conducted through accounting. I dabbed the corner of my mouth. Numbers don't lie. Just the people moving them around. No, Wolfe said. Numbers distort. They suggest patterns that don't exist. They conceal motive behind columns and formulas. In the courtroom, this is called evidence. In the world of men, it is camouflage. I raised my glass. To camouflage. He ignored the toast. Hume did not act out of nobility, Wolfe continued. Nor fear. He acted because he could no longer bear ambiguity. The others, Greaves, Torrance, thrived on it. But Hume wanted clarity. In the absence of moral clarity, he created procedural clarity. Which, in his world, is the same thing. For some, Wolfe agreed. But not for all. He returned to his duck, then paused again. It's not the crime that bothers me, Archie. It's the erosion. The slow chipping away of principle by small, justifiable acts. I set my fork down. You're getting sentimental. I'm getting old. You're not old. You're eternal. That got me a faint grunt. When lunch ended, Wolfe excused himself for his afternoon orchid session, and I returned to the office to log the final case notes. Not for a file, Wolfe never allows written reports, but for my own satisfaction. Case summary: Bartleby, Hume and Torrance. Initial complaint: anomalies in internal equity ledger. Crime: strategic fund diversion, reputational sabotage, attempted institutional erasure. Resolution: voluntary confession, audit, partner reshuffling, systemic correction. Threat level: moderate. Ego damage: extensive. Wolfe's irritation is moderate and lingering. Archie's fieldwork score 8 out of 10 downgraded for rainy stakeout and overcooked coffee at Grafton's building. I closed the notebook just as the doorbell rang. This time, it was Saul. He stepped in, nodded once, and handed me a sealed envelope. For Wolfe? No, Saul said. For you. I opened it. Inside was a small business card, unassuming except for the gold lettering. Ellen Varn, managing partner, Bartleby Varn LLP. Rebuilding begins with precision. On the back was a handwritten line: "You were right." He never saw it coming. I tucked the card into the edge of my typewriter and sat back. Cases like these never go out with a bang. They don't end with handcuffs or press headlines. They dissolve into polite transitions and revised letterheads. But if you've done it right, if you've watched the corners and followed the stammer, not the scream, you see the shape of justice in the rearrangement. That's Wolfe's genius. And my privilege. Outside, the sky was clearing. Inside, the brownstone was quiet. Dinner would come. The orchids would bloom. And the next disruption, whatever form it took, would ring the bell like always. We'd be ready.